Morning everyone, and thank you for joining us on day one of Eating Disorders Awareness Week. The theme this year will be focusing on eating disorders in men, and we're pleased to be joined a little bit later by Dean Bourne, who will be telling us a little bit more about his experiences of living with an eating disorder. But Dean is also a peer support worker as well now, so he's supporting people by using his own experiences to help others. So welcome, Dean. We'll also be joined by Donna Hamilton, who is the Service Manager and Clinical Lead for the All-Age Eating Disorder Service at Black Country Healthcare. We also have Serena Williamson, who is Lead Dietitian, and Chrissy Priest, who is the Team Lead for the Children and Young People Service in Dudley and Walsall. So before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping notes. We do ask if you can please keep your microphone on mute until you need to speak, as this just helps with the sound quality and ensures that there's no sound interference. There will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions. We will have a Q&A, and you can either direct your questions to my colleague Kate Pritchard or myself if you would like to remain anonymous, or you can raise your hand at the end and we can bring you into the conversation as well. If you want to, please introduce yourself, and you can turn your camera on as well, but it's entirely up to you, whatever you feel more comfortable with. You can, and also just to note that this is being recorded as well, because we would like to share this via our internal and external communication channels too. Okay, so we'll make a start. We've just got a short video that we'd like to share, if that's okay. So just bring that up now. If anybody does have any issues with sound, please also just put a message in the chat as well, and hopefully we can sort that for you. So hopefully that's given you a bit of background to our all-age eating disorder service. I'm now going to hand over to Donna Hamilton, and she is going to deliver today's webinar, if that's okay. So over to you, Donna.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on our webinar at the start of Eating Disorders Awareness Week. I know that we've probably got a mix of an audience. I know we've had lots of interest shown from people who perhaps are in touch with and work with young people and adults who may have an eating disorder, but I'm guessing there might also be people who are here today who are have family members or friends who might have an eating disorder, or maybe even people themselves who've been experiencing eating disorders too. So I'm trying to keep that in mind as we go through today. We've broken the session down into different parts, but the first bit is about talking about the service that we provide here in the Black Country. We've been going through a lot of transformation of services, but I really wanted to start with a little bit of history really. So we're an all-age eating disorder service, which is something that is up and coming in eating disorder services nationally. So frequently now I get calls from around the country of people, the services who are wanting to develop this kind of model and asking us how it works. And that's because an all-age model has lots of benefits, specifically around the fact that you might be familiar with when young people reach 18 that they transition to adult mental health services, and that can obviously create all sorts of difficulties. So having an all-age model means that it's quite a seamless transition for people, and in fact it means that actually for some people they probably might not even necessarily notice the transition in their care at all, and that's because we tailor people's treatment to them as individuals rather based on their age. So it might be that there are some people who are like 17, 16 who actually would benefit better from a more adult based treatment method, perhaps because of where they are into individuating as an adult. And equally, there might be some young people that would benefit from continuing more traditional family-based treatment for their eating sort of post-18 as well. So that works really well. So historically, I mean, I've been in this service over 5 years now, and there was initially in Sandwell and Wolverhampton an adult service for eating disorders in Wolverhampton, an adult one in Sandwell, a young people's one in Sandwell, and a young people's one in Wolverhampton. And we brought those together as one all-age service and have been doing that for some time. More recently, there was a merger of what was Black Country Partnership Trusts with Dudley and Walsall Mental Health Trust, and we've done the same there. We've pulled together all the existing eating disorder services in Dudley and Walsall and pulled them together under the all-age model as well. And so now we have this really big and sort of growing service. So since the merger, we've been having to do lots of things. So we've been developing sort of our team culture and making sure that we grow a really experienced and specialist multidisciplinary team to deliver evidence-based care. And obviously, as part of that, we've been going through mass recruitment, and you might know that that's been happening nationally in eating disorder services anyway, as part of community transformation, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. So when you recruit new people to a workforce, not all of those people will have masses of eating disorders experience. Some will, some won't. So as part of induction, it's really important for us to be thinking about skill mix to make sure that people who are working with our patients are confident and competent to do so. And obviously that also means we've been inducting a lot of people. At my last count, within the last 12 months, I want to say it was about 31 people we'd recruited to our service, which is a lot of people to recruit, train and induct. Nationally, Health Education England have been quite supportive of training the eating disorders workforce. So there's been training around mantra, which is the Maudsley model for working with anorexia, CBT, and family-based ways of working for young people as well. And that's kind of growing. So that's really good to know that eating disorders is being invested in, especially when we know how important our client group is to have really specialist and prompt care and treatment. So something else we've been doing as part of the merger is aligning pathways, and that's because having brought together the existing Sandwell and Wolverhampton all-age service and then the services in Dudley and Walsall, they were working in very different ways. So this is quite new. I would say I've been looking after Dudley and Walsall since March, April last year as well. So we've still got a long way to go. But we are getting there, particularly with referral pathways. That's something that's really important to us. So this is year 3 in April that we're going to as part of community transformation, where we received extra funding, particularly to focus on 2 things. One being primary care, and the other being eating disorders outreach. So what we've been doing with primary care is we've already linked in with Sandwell Public Health. And we've been out to various schools and done some pieces of work. We're looking at the training around school health nurses as well, and reaching out to kind of the third sector. So obviously there's a lot more that we want to do there, because primary care is a really important part of preventative work for eating disorders. And we, perhaps from your experience, more and more young people are able to be influenced by newer things really over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, as in social media and things like that as well. So we really want to focus on improving kind of early intervention work that's out there for people to try and help prevent eating disorders in the first place, because that would be really great. And actually one of the difficulties that comes with working in eating disorders is that we live in a society that's very driven by body image, in how people judge and measure themselves. Most people will know somebody who'll be talking about being on a diet, or needing to go to the gym, and sometimes taking some of the more national health messages, such as eat less of, or be more active, to real extremes. So we know that there's lots of pressure in society, and it's important for us to be thinking about what are normal societal ways of thinking about body image, as opposed to somebody having an eating disorder. And I think the line between that is sometimes very difficult to draw out when we think about psychopathology with eating disorders. And then talking about eating disorders outreach. So again, this is a newer kind of way of working that not all services nationally have, but it's one that we've been really keen to do. So particularly through the last few years when we've lived through COVID, we saw a big increase in the number of people that were referred to our service, and who actually came to us at the point of which, when we first saw them, felt they needed a hospital admission, whether that be into an acute or paediatric setting, or a specialist eating disorders bed. And so we were trying to think, well, within our service, what can we do to kind of try and prevent people needing to access sort of specialist inpatient care and treatment. So we've developed our outreach model, which is very individualised to people, but is to try and prevent admission to specialist beds, and also is a step down when people have been in inpatient care as well. And generally we're looking at that being around about a 12-week intervention, but again, it will be different for different people, and one of the things we always try and do our service is make care individual to that person and their family's needs. So within our outreach team, we've got nurses and dietitians linking with that, and CBT therapists, and our support workers and occupational therapists. So it's it just extends part of our MDT team there. So that's been a lot of work, and at the same time as merging, and at the same time as community transformation, and at the same time as going through a pandemic of which we continue to see our patients face to face, primarily because we know that what we see when we see our patients is really important in contributing to our risk assessment and management of people. There's been other developments in eating disorders. So one of them is around ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, which some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not. And again, this is very new to eating disorders, and I know that when I speak to other services nationally, they're quite impressed with where we are with our pathway. And even though we're right at the beginning, I know that some services have been yet to do anything at all. So a few years back, there was a national pilot into looking at how we work with people who have ARFID, and we are coming up or closing into our first year of piloting how we work with people with ARFID in Wolverhampton and Sandwell. And we started there because we'd already got a more robust and higher staffing levels. So we're going to be doing a service evaluation to take stock of all that we've learned this year, so that we can roll out those ways of working into the Dudley and Walsall element of our service. Because obviously in the background we've been heavily staffing our Dudley and Walsall part of our service too. So our physical health clinics, so there used to be something called Marzipan, which was looking at how we manage high risk and poorly people really with anorexia. And this last year that was replaced by MEAD, which is Medical Emergencies and Eating Disorders. So as part of that, we've been linking in with acute hospital settings and paediatric settings, to be thinking about how we make sure that we effectively care for, from a physical standpoint, anybody who is very unwell with anorexia. So this would include thinking about things like refeeding syndrome, ensuring we're not underfeeding people, and really preserving life and keeping people as well as we possibly can. So alongside that, we've set up our own physical health clinics within the service, where our advanced nurse practitioners can more effectively see people for things like ECGs, blood pressure, and all those kind of things as kind of monitoring clinics, so that we know that that is being effectively monitored, measured, and responded to accordingly, rather than really having to rely on other services outside of our own to do that kind of work. So as you can see, we've been really busy. So where are we now? So I mentioned briefly the increased incidence of eating disorders, which has had a massive impact, and actually has been really good that at the same time as that increase in incidence that's been coming through to our service, that we've been increasing our staffing levels, because one of the things that's really important is waiting times for services. So as part of the access to waiting time standards for eating disorder services for young people, there's a KPI, which is the expectation is that we see anybody who's an urgent referral into the service within 7 days, and anybody who's a routine referral within 28 days. And last year we were the 3rd best ICS in the country for those waiting times. And also something that we did that's perhaps very different to other services nationally is when we built our all age service, we thought we don't want any disparity or postcode type lotteries or variants that put anybody at a disadvantage within our service. So we also utilised this KPI internally for our adult patients. So again, 7 days for an urgent referral, 28 days for a routine. And that's quite important to say, because and I think it's something when I talk to other services about doing an all age model, that actually you have to have parity across your service. So we've been linking with other services to work collaboratively. So it's quite a difficult thing, because we know there's lots of work to do. We know that lots of other services want training from us, and we're really keen to do that. But at the same time as doing all the developments in our service and seeing more patients and more poorly patients than ever, and recruiting and training our own staff, we've been growing a list of other services that want training for us. And in the next few months, I know Serena, Christine, and I are going to be looking at who needs what kind of training, and pulling some of that together as well. So if that was something you had a question about, that hopefully that's helpful for you to know. And I do have a big list of different services. We've also been, as I mentioned before, working collaboratively with public health within primary care, and generally we're really open to work with any professional group or service that is working with young people who have an eating disorder. And we have a duty system every day in our service. So if you want to pick up the phone and ring us because you've got a question about whether it be, I'm not sure I've got this young person or this adult in front of me, I'm not sure whether it's an eating disorder, or I'm not sure whether I want to refer to you, please pick up the phone and ask us, because one of the things that we never want to do is delay people accessing treatment. And this is because we know early treatment and access to services improves the outcomes in people's lives, really, not just in symptom reduction, but in improvement of quality of life. So I've mentioned a little bit about our offered and our service evaluation, which is going to be something really important, and Serena will be able to answer more questions and talk a bit more about that. We're also involved in a couple of research studies. So one is the Eating Disorders Genetics Initiative, and I think the very last slide of this presentation talks a little bit about that. So at the moment we're looking to recruit people who have an eating disorder, and there's more information kind of on the last slide about that. We're also going to be hopefully linking in very soon with the UVATE study, and that's looking at ethnic variations in access to eating disorders in the West Midlands. And that's really important for us, because again, hopefully I've mentioned the word about parity of service and equality, and giving you that kind of, that's very important to us as a team, and as one of our kind of values, really. And it builds on the fact that a few years ago we did our own service evaluation, where we looked at people who identify as male, LGBTQ, or varying backgrounds too. And we looked at how people, their experience really of accessing services, their experience whilst they were in the service too, and made some recommendations for our own service, which we've been putting in place. So we now have what we call culture days. We have those around about once a quarter, and focus on just ensuring that we are really thinking and including in treatment and assessment these really important parts of people's identity and who they are. So our last CQC inspection, we got good in all areas and outstanding in responsiveness. And obviously we want to continue to grow and get better and better with that. But I think, as well as always wanting to get better, I think sometimes it's really important to take stock of where we are and actually knowing how good a job we've been doing already. There's lots of really good stuff when you compare us sort of nationally and regionally. And we're a very passionate team. You can see in the picture that some of us, when we went to our staff award ceremony, and we won an award there, and that's really important. I think it's something that kind of shows the team a big thank you really, and recognition for their passion and dedication to the job that they do. And I think one of the first things I said on the first slides that we've been doing is developing our sort of team and sense of family, and that's really important to us. So can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I'm just going to hand over to Serena, who's going to talk about early intervention in eating disorders.
Good morning, everyone. So we joined the Freed network in 2021, in the middle of the pandemic. So we know, obviously, with eating disorders, they remain, they have the highest mortality out of any mental illness, and that continues. Early intervention has been a huge focus on that nationally over the past few years, and we know that the earlier people get treatment and they access treatment, the better the outcomes are. So FREED stands for First Episode of Rapid Early Intervention for Eating Disorders. So it's very much aimed at younger people accessing the service at that key transitional age as well, so 16 to 25. So to meet the criteria for FREED, which is something we've added to our service, and we're a member of the network nationally as well. So they have to be 16 to 25 years old. Their first episode or presentation of treatment for their eating disorder, and it's been going on for less than 3 years. And really the aims around treatment and the FREED model are around accessing early, but also getting seen really quickly as well. So in our service, if we screen and accept an urgent referral, we see them within a week, or aiming to see a routine referral within 4 weeks. So the earlier we get them in, the better. And a lot of what we do with this age group is around eating disorders in the brain, because we know, for example, that treating starvation quickly, reversing the impact on the brain is really, really important. Also looking at things like social media as well, which I know John has mentioned, sort of the focus on body image now. It's gone from, in society where we're perhaps, 20, 30 years ago, we're comparing ourselves to maybe just people within our classroom or our school, and now we're comparing ourselves with millions of people nationally and internationally. So there's quite a big focus on social media with FREED, but also connecting with families, carers really early on and involving them in the treatment as well. So BEAT has some really good resources as well for spotting the signs and eating disorders, which I'll do a little bit more in a moment. But yeah, it's about building up that support network, and as Donna mentioned, for us as a service, it's also about training people as well, so that people aren't encountering barriers when accessing our service. Yeah, so spotting the signs, one of the figures is 1.25 million people in the UK have an eating disorder, and we know that around a quarter of those are male, so that's really, really important to say. And perhaps, we're really increasingly looking at why men perhaps aren't accessing services in the same way, and trying to move on from, I think the very traditional view of anorexia, for example, was that it had to be very, very underweight females accessing treatment. That is really not the case. And recognising perhaps what the differences are in men as well. So For the young men, obviously men of all ages, I particularly see younger ones at the moment, there tends to be a lot of focus on exercise, for example. So that's something to really look out for. Yeah, and it's one of my areas I get very passionate about is that we've got to just move away from that stereotype of people being very, very underweight. We see people of all shapes and sizes accessing our service. They do not have to be, you know, severely underweight. You know, rate of weight loss is extremely important and is reflected in the risk guidance that we have. How quickly people are losing weight, but also looking at, you know, what are people experiencing when they visit their GP or they try and get help early on for an eating disorder? Are they, you know, accessing treatment when it's not just all about weight? And I think that's something we really need to challenge. There's some research, particularly adolescents, or actually their psychological impact of not getting treatment, and they're actually, that was actually worse at a healthier weight because of the stigma associated. So that's something that's really, really important. This is what we're looking at, is getting people into the service a lot more quickly. So BEAT has some really good resources on spotting the signs. Are they on the next slide? Checking that one. Yes, there you go. So some of the things you might be looking at. Oh, can I have the next slide, please? Lovely, thank you. So this is quite a memorable one from BEAT. It's been around a little while now. So lips, are they more obsessive about food? Are they calorie counting? It may not just be calorie counting. There's calories all over menus now, which is perhaps something that people might notice if you're out with friends or loved ones. Are they, one thing we see quite a lot is people that perhaps are taking control of food for friends, family, others, but perhaps missing out on opportunities to eat themselves, or restricting, not participating in eating socially. They may be, it may not just be calories as well, so it can be anything like labels, fat. We see fat quite a lot, people quite concerned about fat content. And then people tend to be increasingly obsessive about the food they're eating and more selective, or they might cut out food groups as well. So one of the things that we see a lot of is people perhaps cutting out carbohydrates, for example, fats, or they may follow a more vegetarian or vegan diet. There's a rise in veganism nationally. But we also see that as a means to restrict as well. So that's something we're seeing a lot of at the moment. Flips, is their behaviour changing? Not just around food and eating, but they may be a lot more sensitive. They may be more irritable. They may be becoming more isolated, spending time away from family or friends. You're just noticing that they're more withdrawn, or upset, or low, or anxious. So yeah, obviously that distortion on body image, about body image as well, hips. So do they have distorted beliefs about their body size? Are they trying to get to a lower weight, or when they get there, are they then trying to decrease that further? Or are they losing weight very quickly? Have you noticed, are they wearing bigger clothing, for example, is another one you might notice. Are they're really comparing themselves? Like Donna said, we live in a society where there's that comparison all the time, but is it more becoming more of an issue? Hips, obviously if there's dietary restriction or overeating or binging behaviour as well, they can get really, really tired, struggle to concentrate. They may have some of the physical symptoms as well, like becoming dizzy, passing out, low blood sugar. So, you know, suddenly becoming, again, you can become quite irritable with that, but physically just struggling. Nips, so if we're looking at bulimia, they may disappear to the toilet after meals, again, or become more isolated, or they may really want to exercise as well. That's coming into the next one, so we're dealing with more purging behaviours there. Also, people want to burn up calories by exercise. Have they embarked on perhaps a new exercise program, or are they having to do that all of the time? Is it something that they're becoming perhaps more obsessive about? If they eat, are they having to burn up the energy that they've eaten, for example, or are they using that more and more as a means to control their body weight? So there's some of the things to notice. Obviously, we've talked about ARFID as well briefly. So ARFID stands for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. The difference with ARFID is these people restrict their diet, but it is not a means to lose weight. So that is quite different. There isn't that fixation on body image, and that's something we really have to look for carefully when we screen referrals. So with ARFID, people can develop a real lack of interest in eating for various reasons. They can also have particular sensory needs which make them really specific about the food that they eat, or they may avoid food or eating because they are particularly anxious about it as well, or fearful. So we call that one a fear profile. Now, originally when ARFID came about, people felt that they had to fit in one particular profile, but that's very much not the case. They can often one profile of ARFID impacts the other. So, for example, people that develop a lack of interest in eating, and that can be for a variety of reasons. We see various diagnoses, like ADHD, for example, or autism as well. They just don't have the same kind of hunger cues as others. They may have had early adverse experiences with eating. I see quite a lot of people who perhaps had recurrent tonsillitis or severe reflux as a child, and their early feeding experiences haven't been enjoyable, and that they develop a very selective profile of eating. Then if you're not getting that enjoyment from eating, that can lead you to be quite fearful of what you eat as well. So those profiles of ARFID are the profile, they can overlap and interlink. So those are some of the things to look out for ARFID. And again, the earlier people are getting help, the better.
And so that's something that we've been doing new, isn't it, in the service? Is the last year we've started our kind of assessment clinics in Wolverhampton and Sandwell around screening and assessing properly for ARFID. But I think it's probably important as well to mention that, you know, this is something that nationally is going to be the expectation, is that eating disorder services are heavily involved in working with people with ARFID, but that doesn't mean everybody with ARFID. If you think about the number of people with the eating difficulties like you've described, that's really high number, isn't it? You know, with having to
very important thing to do actually, that with ARFID. So it isn't every selective eater in the country. It has to be impacting their lives significantly. So not always, but often, you know, they're losing weight. Similarly to when I said look at the signs with, you know, restriction. This isn't related to body image, but you might see that restriction, or you might see that it's starting to affect their growth. They're the kind of presentations we can help with. Also with the deficiency, they may develop nutritional deficiencies as well. So that's one of the key things about it. They may not be underweight. Again, we are seeing people all across the spectrum of weight. It's a myth that you have to be underweight to get treatment. You know, they may also eat or even overeat because they rely on maybe one food group, for example, but they might not be getting the vitamins and minerals that their bodies need. So that can also become really serious. If you think of some of the things that have been in the press, there was one person that unfortunately went blind because of a vitamin A deficiency. So we're looking at it in a very different way. But yes, it isn't every selective eater in the country. So they do have to meet certain criteria. But if, you know, there's some warning signs, you know, the dietary restriction is really, really quite extreme. So a good rule of thumb as well, if they're eating less than 10 foods or 5 foods in their diet, that's a bit of a concern, a bit of a red flag as well. But it's not, it depends very much on what those foods are as well. So we want them accessing treatment, but we're carefully screening whether they're suitable for our service at the moment, because there's a lot of research yet to be done in ARFID. We are at the pilot stage. So as Donna said, we're hopefully completing our pilot this spring. And then we'll be doing a service evaluation on that. We're just seeing some of the more complex, serious presentations in Walsall and Dudley as well. But it's about people getting the right treatment. So I think we're going to go on talking about that in a moment. So it's actually working with services around people already as well. So it isn't always about our service working alone with these people. Some of the therapies that we use for eating disorders, like family treatment and CBT, are being adapted for ARFID. And sometimes people, for example, with a lack of interest profile, they may work well with our support workers, but they have to be quite extreme presentations or really quite poorly and risky. But a lot of it's going to be about how we're working with other services and education around ARFID as well. So going into schools, starting to link in with schools, paediatric services, speech and language therapy, for example, to get these people the right help. So it's a journey at the moment. So we're going to extend the pilot probably to Walsall and Dudley as well and complete that. but yeah, spotting those early signs again are important, getting help early, but a lot of it's going to be about us working collaboratively with things like primary care as well.
And that comes back to what I was mentioning about training of the services, isn't it? So everybody feels equipped or more confident in knowing how to get help or what to do to support people.
Yeah, so how to get help, or on that slide already. So there's some resources there about Beat. Yeah, Beat has information on ARFID as well. Yeah, and there's a contact number there as well. Yeah, so early treatment. It has some quite good carer support as well. Carer sheets we can access, including for ARFID as well.
And although we will accept a referral from any professional working with somebody who they think has an eating disorder, I think it's really important to understand why we ask people to go and see their GP. And that's because until we've seen and assessed them, we're unclear on what the risk is. And we know that there are so many risks to people's physical and mental health living with an eating disorder that a GP, hopefully, is somebody that you can see more promptly. And, you know, for example, if somebody needs to go straight to A&E because they're so physically unwell, they can be sent there by their GP. But again, if somebody was so unwell and concerned about their physical health, I would ask them to go straight to A&E or utilise 999 in emergency services if indeed it feels that something that is increasing in intensity or getting worse in terms of physical symptoms that they think might be related to an eating disorder. And indeed, if you contacted the services and were that worried about somebody, that is what we would say to you, really. There's also Beat do a really good leaflet. There's a picture of it. You'll see there's a seeking treatment for an eating disorder. If you go on their website, they have this really good leaflet that you can print off and take with you to the GP. And this is because sometimes people find it difficult to have those conversations, or they might have been and felt that they were didn't get the response that they wanted to if they've been previously. But this is something that you can take with you. And you'll see that then the next box, which I've copied and put on the slide, is around misunderstandings you might come across. So if the response from a GP or somebody you're trying to get help from says things like, well, you've not been unwell long enough, or your weight doesn't suggest you need a referral, or it might be a phase you're going through, or even if, and we've seen this where people have been applauded for losing weight and dieting and exercising to extremes. Here are some of some helpful ways about how you can respond to not getting the helpful response from referral if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, just to go back to ARFID again very briefly, I do hear some people come in and they have very conflicting advice, ranging from force feed your child to, or they'll eat when they're hungry, those types of things. Well, if they're, that is really unhelpful advice, and that is perhaps quite extreme. That's the worst that I've heard in recent months. But again, that isn't appropriate. And again, by having that information on ARFID, you can show that if you are having difficulties with the GP or the health professionals, and there is a service available for assessment and screening of ARFID. So that's just to mention that as well.
Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so just thinking now about how we can support somebody with an eating disorder. So I guess one of the main things to think about really is that we know that people that suffer with eating disorders often feel a lot of shame. So I think it's really important when supporting someone with an eating disorder that there's no blame attached to that person or to anybody. A lot of people that come into our service, often families are kind of seeking an answer as to why their loved one has got an eating disorder. And unfortunately, sometimes we don't know the answer to that, and we may never find the answer to that. But it's about staying solution focused and making sure that it's, we think about recovery and moving forward, because we know that recovery is possible, and we know that life can absolutely get better with the right treatment. I think recognising that eating disorders, it's not just about food. So often when young people or people in general have an eating disorder, they're experiencing a lot of pain, potentially sadness and anxiety, and remembering that an eating disorder isn't just about food. I think one of the things you can do to really help a loved one is to go on the Beat website and just really try and educate yourself around eating disorders. Alongside that, being really mindful of the conversations that you're having. So, we often hear people talking about diets, about the clothes feeling particularly tight or not liking the way they look in the mirror. I think it's about being really mindful and self-aware of the conversations that you may be having around those that are struggling. Validation is really important. So validating the person and how difficult living with an eating disorder is. It really is one of the most tormenting illnesses that anybody can experience. And I think it's crucial that you know, the illness isn't downplayed at all. This is a really serious mental illness. Thinking about listening to the person that you care for, making sure that they've got kind of a listening ear and somebody that they feel they can talk to. And then I guess on a practical level, when you may have heard the phrase family-based therapy mentioned, thinking about the practical ways that you can support somebody to eat. So what we often say as part of our family-based therapy is to take control of the eating. Now this is in particular with young people and children, but can be adapted to meet adult needs as well. So thinking about parents taking control of meal planning, portion sizes, and making sure that all meals are supported and supervised as well. Now that's not easy, and actually there's a really nice way of thinking about the support in terms of animals. So what we encourage is that people that support someone with an eating disorder, they act like a dolphin. So they gently nudge, they nurture and they guide the young person or the adult into recovery, versus potentially the rhino, which I know we can all slip into in different, you know, areas of our life where maybe we're a bit more, you know, passive aggressive and forceful. So just picturing that dolphin really when trying to care for somebody with an eating disorder. Thinking about supervision is really important. So making sure that that person has somebody to sit with them at meal time. So not only are you taking control of the meal planning and the preparation and the portion sizes, making sure that person's supervised not only during meal times, but before and after, when we know that anxiety levels are going to be particularly high. So we know that everybody is individualised. What we often see is that people with eating disorders often don't appreciate praise. So it might feel quite unnatural to start with. If you're supporting someone to eat a meal, you know that's really difficult for them. They manage it. The first thing you want to do is, well done, you've done brilliant. That's brilliant. Well done. That's amazing. Actually, what we know from kind of our service users is that can actually fuel feelings of guilt post meals. So having a conversation with your loved one, thinking about what's helpful for us to talk about. How would you like me to acknowledge the fact that you finished that meal? Do you want me to acknowledge it at all? And just really start to have those individualised conversations about that support. Distraction at meal times is key as well. So again, this is very individualised. Just have that open conversation. What would you like me to talk about while you're eating? Do you want me to talk about the weather or what I watched on, you know, Strictly Come Dancing yesterday? Or do you want me to be encouraging you and prompting you? With meal support, two of the main words I always think about is consistency and being persistent. So being constant in your approach, being persistent and not giving up. You know, that the person struggling with an eating disorder may feel quite hopeless, and actually what they need from you is to reinstall that hope that when they feel too unwell to fight, you're going to help them fight this illness. Thinking about kind of the social aspect as well of eating disorders. So we know that often young people with eating disorders, or adults with eating disorders, can become quite isolated and socially withdrawn. Keep inviting them out. You know, make sure that offer's there. Make sure that they know that they're thought about. Think about how you can socialise without the use of food, and actually that can sometimes prove more difficult. You know, think about your general social life. It's often going out for a coffee or for a meal, but thinking about actually how can you socialise without that aspect of food as well. One of the phrases that I tend to use, particularly with my families who are supporting young people with eating disorders, is strike when the iron's cold. So thinking about potentially some of the challenging behaviours that you might be faced with, and when it's the right time to challenge those. So what we know is that when people are in a form of escalation, that their emotions are heightened. And when both emotions are heightened, we know that it's really difficult to kind of process any information being given to us. So striking when the iron's cold is basically thinking about waiting for the situation to calm down, going back to it and reflecting on it afterwards, rather than in the heat of the moment where the information may not be as welcomed. Self-care is really, really important. So thinking about, you know, your own self-care, filling up your own cup, or as they often say, putting your own oxygen mask on first, because actually we know how difficult it can be as well for somebody supporting a loved one with an eating disorder. Make sure that you take some time to look after yourself, because we know that you need to look after yourself in order to look after others.
Okay, thanks, Chrissy. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you, thank you. So, as we've mentioned, this year's Eating Disorders Awareness Week is focusing specifically around eating disorders in men. So, you know, around 1 in 4 people affected by eating disorders are men, and that's really important to think about. Serena referenced a while ago how, you know, traditionally in the past people thought of young middle class white females as people who had eating disorders, and this is not the case. And certainly when we did our service evaluation, looking at, you know, more individualised factors in people and accessing treatment and being engaged in the service, what we found is that, and we knew more than ever, was that eating disorders affect everybody across the board. And so, you know, that's why we've been doing lots of work with our team around culture in the widest possible sense and identity, to make sure that when people come to our service, that they're coming to somewhere that's understanding and validating and appreciative and really catering for people's individual needs. So, I've got with us today Dean. Thank you, Dean. Dean is our peer support worker. So we invited Dean along because he's very new to our service, but more importantly than anything, he's got lots of lived experience around living with an eating disorder. So I'm going to have a bit of a chat with Dean, hopefully not put him on the spot too much, but I'm really thinking and understanding what his role is in the service and how beneficial this will be to our service users. So I thought, Dean, it might be helpful to perhaps think about some of the barriers that men might experience in asking for help with an eating disorder. What kind of barriers, you know, have you found in your experience that there are for men in accessing help?
Okay, morning everyone. I suppose, first of all, I'm a 50-year-old guy. There's a lot of pressure on men to, or sorry, I should say there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure that us as men put in our own heads to talk to, you know, we don't want to share our feelings, especially when it comes to things like the way we look or any kind of eating disorder, whether you're restricting your eating or you're eating too much. We just don't want to talk about it. And I felt the same with talking to my family as well, if I'm honest. And I was quite ashamed to actually, you know, first of all, just to recognise I got a problem. You know, I was sort of the opinion that I just ate too much, and on occasion was told, you just eat too much, you know, you're greedy and all of these other things, which is what society, you can remember, I'm a person of the 70s. So it was very different then as well. And that's, although it is better now, it's still the case there.
And Dean, you mentioned, you know, people's kind of response to you. I guess it made me wonder, when was the first time you got a positive response when you sort of shared your experience with somebody?
Right, okay. This is really interesting. So I spent a long time being very lonely, and it just got worse and worse. And I've got, you know, I'm very lucky. I've got a very good family around me, and I've got a very good bunch of friends around me. And I'd sort of talked to a friend about it and mates about it, and the response was really strange. I was in there like really concerned about, I don't want to talk about this, they're all going to take the mickey out of me, and all of a sudden, you know, I'm no longer a man, whatever that means. But it sort of opened the floodgates, and all of a sudden, all my mates was now telling me about the problems they had. Now, a lot of them didn't have eating disorders, they got their own problems, their own things to deal with. But looking back, how stupid I feel now I held it all inside for such a long time, thinking no one would understand. It was absolutely opposite. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I just wondered what led you to think, if I talk about this, I'm going to get a negative response. Was that experience you'd already had as a man in life, kind of growing up?
Yeah, there's this, I'm not going to say all men, but I can certainly say it about me. We've got this idea that we're the providers and we're the strong ones and all of these things. And yeah, but in reality, we're all a team, aren't we? We all need to work together, is the reality of it all. And but that feeling of having to go to someone, and you know, we've talked about recognising the illness as well, and that's something that, as a bloke, you don't recognise. Well, I'm not saying women do recognise it either, but certainly as a man, we don't tend to recognise it because we don't to get involved with those sorts of conversations, really. You know, it's not about football. We don't really talk. So, you know, we don't talk about health so much, and it's not just about mental health. You know, across the whole spectrum, we don't talk about generally. But I've got one story which is I want to tell because I think it's really important, and my eldest son's going to absolutely go mad at me for this, but I want to tell it anyway. I spoke to my wife about it, and it took her quite a while to really understand. She was very empathetic, but she didn't understand it because she doesn't suffer with it. But I thought I didn't want to tell my children. You know, my children are 18 and 21, so they're still at that age. I'm no longer the hero anyway, and I didn't want to make it worse. Something really strange happened when I talked to them about the situation I had. And then we went off in and I did whatever I've got to do. But it was only last Saturday. I was talking to my eldest son's, one of my eldest son's best friends. And he said to me, he says, Sam's so proud of how you, Sam's my eldest. He says, Sam is so proud of how you've recognised this situation and dealt with it. And it was a real tear to my eye because in my head, all I felt is I'd let my family down. That was absolutely where I felt. Where actually it was absolutely the opposite. And you know, within my my son's friends community, they're talking about it now, and they're talking to each other, which is for me is a fantastic place to be.
Absolutely, particularly in terms of kind of supporting men around mental health in even the broader senses and things about being able to talk about things. But like you say, it's hard when there's been lots of societal shame or stigma around talking about these things, or how men should be referenced to that around, like, you know, how would you be as a man if you had an eating disorder?
Absolutely, and I know now, I can go, I'm very lucky because I've got a really good support structure around me. And there's a local pub that we go to, which is where I say my children, they're all adults now. And we can all talk quite openly. I know if Grandad comes, he sort of looks at us as, what are you doing? We don't talk about these things. But that's not the case. And if there's one thing I really want to get across to people, is talk to someone. It might be a friend, it might be your spouse, it might be your family, whoever it is, but you don't need to feel lonely. And that's where I felt for a really long time. And if you can just break that, and it is don't get me wrong, it's a large hurdle to get over, but you can break that, all of a sudden you realise you're not on your own. And lots of people are dealing with. And
is that what made it feel easier to come and get help when you felt less alone because you've got connections around you? Absolutely,
it did. So I realised there was something not right. One of it was for me because I was eating too much food. And I know now the reasons why. That was around dealing with my anxieties and all of these other things. And it just gave me a bit of confidence to go and speak to someone, go and speak to a doctor. Beats is something, I'll be honest, Beats is something quite new to me. And I'd like to see promoted more and more and more because there's some great information on there, not just about what I had, which is binge eating, but about all of the different subject matters. It's a great place to start for you as an individual, but also people around you. I think we mentioned earlier about families looking at it, because it sort of breaks down some of the myths. So the next thing I really did was I went and approached my doctor, and we talked about it. We talked about it in this session about, you might go and see a doctor and you may feel like you've been dismissed. I don't think that's the case really, but it's still quite a new subject, isn't it? If you look at the history of medicine, it's still quite a new subject. And there's lots of options that your doctor has got to put in front of you. And I know from me, when the first things that they offered me, they didn't suit me. And that doesn't mean they're not right, but it just didn't suit me as an individual. but that doesn't mean it wouldn't suit you as an individual. So if I had to say, I'd say if it does suit you, great, because you're now on your pathway to recovery. If it doesn't suit you, stick with it, because it's very easy to go, I went to see the doctor, I ain't got a clue what I was talking about, and I've got nowhere to go.
Mhm.
And don't get me wrong, I had those feelings, I had those views, but sticking with it, and then you can sit down and you can talk to them again, explain why you didn't like the options you were given before, and then I found that they will tailor it.
Mhm.
And then eventually I said, no, it wasn't eventually. The next step was then I got introduced to this eating disorder service, and it sort of went from there.
Okay. So I'm just wondering if you had one wish for kind of improving the experience of men with eating disorders, what would that be for you? Get a magic wand.
Yeah, I was going to say, can I only have one wish? You know, I was going to say, I'm going to have two, sorry.
It's all right,
I was going to say, I wish men could be more comfortable with showing their feelings and being able to go and do something about it without feeling like they're a failure or they're not the man they're supposed to be, because all of that is just rubbish. You know, that's what I wanted to say, but actually what I've realised is sticking to it, keeping going. When you go and see the doctor or whoever the professional is you choose to go and see, if they don't get it right for you at the start, don't just throw it out. Go back again, because with time, the right thing comes out for you. And I'm living and breathing as a person that's recovering, and it's absolutely changed my life. I've completely changed careers. I won't bore you with the detail of that, but I have completely changed careers because I've gone from someone who didn't want to talk about it. I was very ashamed of the situation. I carried a lot of guilt, and now I've become an evangelist of it all. And I'm probably moving on to the boring people in it now, actually. But yeah, so that's what I would say is, if you didn't get the the answers you wanted initially, just keep sticking to it, because it will come.
Sounds like a nice piece of advice. And I guess you mentioned BEAT as well. You hadn't heard of it before, but if people can't get that response from their GP, they can go to BEAT. There's a leaflet they can take to the GP, or maybe printing off resources and giving them to somebody they want to talk to, might support that a little bit if they don't quite know the words to say.
It absolutely does. And the other side of it is, when you're looking at it, is you realise that someone has spent time, you've got this charity that's dealing with something, and so you're not on your own. You're not the only person in the world that's got this problem. And so I absolutely would go to the BEAT side.
And you were talking about kind of your family being supportive and stuff. What I'm just thinking about people who might be here today on the webinar, who might have somebody that they care about, they're worried about with a potential eating disorder. What would you say to them was the thing that you valued most from your family giving you, and the ways in which they supported you?
What was I saying? I've got lots of things I could say, because they're all positives. You know, all the things I thought was how it would turn out was completely wrong. I suppose what they've learned to understand from me, and that's from me talking, is understanding me, and them. No, they no longer say, just don't eat it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Oh, that's a good idea. Why didn't I think of that? They're much more supportive around it now, and they make it very clear to me that they're not judging me, and that's been the most powerful thing for me.
Not being judged.
Not being judged, and recognising that actually it is a problem that you need to get through.
Okay. That's, and Dean, I think, we're really pleased that we have you in our team as our peer support worker, because, it's no mean feat to come and share your story, but I think, you're quite inspirational to a lot of people, really, in knowing that, there is help, people can move on in recovery, and actually supporting people with that. I think, you do a great job. So talking about job, I wondered if you could give us a bit of a, do a bit of an overview of your role as peer support worker, because again, it's new to our service and we know that this is expanding sort of nationally, peer support workers in different services. Could you give us a bit of an overview of that?
Yeah, again, I feel like it was meant to be, becoming this peer support worker. And you speak to people, and I think a lot of people, especially when I talk to friends and stuff like that, they don't really understand what it is. And I think nationally, actually, it's still growing, and it's going to continue to change. But I'm doing a training course at the moment, which as part of my NHS induction, really, and I'm meeting with other people that are peer support, but not just in eating disorders. They could, or even the NHS, they could be within the prison service or lots of different roles. And that's fantastic to be able to talk to them and understand. And that's really sort of build what I now understand is about peer support. So to answer your question, which I have finally going to get there, I sort of see it as you've got friends and family that sit there on the left hand side, and I said I was really lucky. I've got really supportive friends and family. I didn't feel it at the time at the early stages, but that was my own fault because I didn't actually reach out to them. When I did reach out to them, I got a completely different response than I was expecting, a very positive response. And they're great, and you can talk about obviously lots of different things with them, and depending on who they are individually, you'll talk about different things. But sometimes you still inside, you're talking to them, and they're not really, they're showing all of the empathy that you need, and then they're saying all the right things, but they don't really understand what you're going through. So you then flick to the other side, which is the professionals. So your doctors, your nurses, and all of these different things, and the therapists and occupational health and dietitians. It's overwhelming with the different level of knowledge we have within, just because I've come from the other side being treated by this service, and I'm now meeting all of the people on the other side, and the wealth of knowledge across is just amazing. There's lots of people with lots of different skill sets that all jigsaw together, which obviously I never saw that. I saw just a front of it. So you've got all of that there, and they've got the knowledge and the experience of dealing with lots of different people and lots of different patterns. But generally what they haven't got is that real life experience of this is how I feel. And I sort of see myself sitting in the middle, and I sort of sit between the friend and the professional. I want to be really clear, I am not a clinician. And I think that's really important. The part of the courses I'm doing at the moment is I'm there to support, not fix. And I think that's been a really good strapline for me. Now, whether that changes in the future, who knows? But what it does is it allows me to sit there and talk to people who they're really nervous about the service. Some people may not be as lucky as me. They may not have the whole network that I would have been, so lucky to have. And also the other side, is people's anxiety. And I'm an overthinker. So, I'll go from a spot to I'm going to die next week, you know what I mean, very easily. But so you might have people who the doctor referred them, and all of a sudden, they're not listening to what's being put in front of them. All they can see is they're going to be institutionalized, and they're going to end up locked in a hospital, and they're going to get loads of drugs and all of these things. And they just go, no, that's not what I want to do. And they end up back in the circle again. Where I see my role, and there's lots of different parts to it, is when you've got people who are struggling with just crossing over that line and being able to talk to the professional people, is I'm there to talk to and to listen to their concerns. And I deal with, I suffer with binge eating. But if you sort of take it up a level to an helicopter view and you look at all the different types, yes, the way we act is very different, You know, some people restrict, some people, you know, they make themselves sick, and some people eat too much. But if you take it up a level, actually the anxieties and the fears and whatever else are very similar. I would never want to turn around and say they're the same, because that would be very wrong. But they're similar, and you can start to have real conversations about how they feel. And very often I'll go, oh, you know, and you did that, don't tell me. You also did that. And so I get it, because I've been there. You know, I'll make a joke now, is, you know, I now have a master's degree in secret eating. At the time I wouldn't talk about it, because I was very embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
But now, you know, I could do all sorts of things to hide what I do with food. And one of the things that I did as part of my therapy, I did group therapy, and I really didn't want to do it. I just did not want to do the group therapy for whatever the reasons were. But the people here at this centre talked me into it and said, look, Dean, why don't you try it? If you don't like it, you can always walk away. It was the best thing I ever did.
And it's interesting, Dean, because I think, as you know, we do questionnaires, don't we? And we get patient feedback at the end of all of our groups. And without doubt, everybody really appreciates that kind of shared experience and that kind of reduction in loneliness and isolation, or not being misunderstood. And I think you're right. I think
you know, I'm not saying
worry, but it's probably helpful.
I'm not saying it's for everyone. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to dictate that's what we should do. What I'm saying though is, for me, I really didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
But when I met with the people, we very quickly created this bond that we understood each other, and we could talk about anything between it. We know, and the way the sessions are, certainly what I did, was half of the session was about how did you get on last week, and then the other half was about the theory of how you get the tools to learn to help you. The first part, where we talked to each other about what has happened, fantastic. I can't say it enough. So I sort of extend. I am still talking about my role, by the way. I know I'm going off in the direction.
No, you are. I think absolutely linking into it.
But I see sort of the peer support. If you think about the group therapy, which the bit that I love was being able to talk to other people who go, yeah, then I completely get where you're coming from. Oh, well, have you tried this? The peer support piece is I can then go and take that to other people who have engaged with the service and might not be ready, or the other side is they get halfway through. Because I remember when I was doing part of the service, part of the treatment, I got about a quarter of the way, and I thought, I don't feel like I'm getting anything from this.
Yeah.
But it's a bit like going back to school. You've got to learn the theory, haven't you? You know, and then all of a sudden it started to come. So I feel that part of my role is, you know, when I call them the professionals, you know, the therapists and whatever else, when they sort of see people and think, this person's sort of losing interest. Yeah. May not particularly for a medical reason, but they're losing interest. This is where I'll probably be pulled in to really have conversations with them, because I've felt it, I've been there.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about really is motivation changes as you're going through treatment. Because, you know, on day one you think, yeah, I'm really up for this, doesn't mean on day 10 you're going to feel equally as motivated as you do today. No, not at all. And I think the important thing around that is you know, I spent 30 years of not eating correctly, which I didn't realise, by the way. That's only now, looking back, I can see the patterns. Why did I expect that this treatment was going to be fixed in two sessions? It doesn't work that way, does it? No. It's a lot of hard work, isn't it? It is. Absolutely, it is. So you know, I come back to my wish, actually, that I was talking about, and that's about just keep going. And there's definitely lots of times when you're thinking, I can't be bothered, I'm not interested, I don't want to do it, but just keep going. And what I'd like to see the service grow into is when people have got that, you know, they're not going to talk to me about a clinical issue, because I'd love to tell them, but I'd probably give them the wrong advice. But when they've got something which is about them personally, and they just want to get it off their chest and go, I don't feel it's working for me or whatever, then from there, I can hopefully go, yeah, I was there, and this is how I deal with it. The last part of my role as well is about getting real feedback as well, from the people that we work with, our clients, and just to get feedback and say, right, what did you think of the service? You know, you're not giving it to the person who's been giving you this treatment last, you know, which sometimes can be embarrassing.
you're talking to someone who's sort of stepped away from it, and you can, you know, and my job as part of this as well is to feed back into our service and say, right, okay, this is what I'm getting back. Is there anything we can do to start to continue to grow our?
And I think that's an important thing that you touching on, Dean. That's something that we're doing more and more in the services, looking at co-production, isn't it? And how we can utilise service users in every aspect of the service that we're developing, and when we do something new, so that they feel very involved and part of the service, really. And especially because I think we find in my experience over time, I found that lots of people who've been through the service want to be able to give something back, and being involved in giving feedback can be part of that, can't it?
Well, absolutely, because as I say, the training I'm doing at the moment, I'm meeting lots of people in my type of roles, and they've all got their own histories. So it is, and that's where I felt. As I say, I moved out of my previous career, which was nothing like this at all, into this, and actually, I can't wait to get up in the morning to get involved.
Oh, bless you. Well, that's really nice to hear. Thank you, Dean. So, I mean, we've moved through the things that we've kind of prepared to talk about today, and I suppose we wanted to open the floor to any questions that people might have.
Hi, Donna, it's Kate. I've just been monitoring the chat, and we've got some questions, if I can go through those. This one's from Demi, and she just asked, hello, is the community team contact one number for both adults and children?
Yeah, because we're an all-age service, so we don't have separations in that way at all, no. We're just one service, there's no differentiation on age.
Ash has also asked, well, they've commented to say you're doing an amazing job. If staff on the paediatric wards at Sandwell Hospital are struggling with ARFID, can they access support from your team?
Yeah, I mean, certainly what we do at the moment, and what we're going to build on more as well, the dietitians in the service, because again, dietetics in the service has grown from 1 to near 4 dietitians across all 4 sites. We are doing some acute training, and that is just to dietitians, but actually we're hopefully going to roll out some ARFID training as well. So we're training our own team at the moment, which is really important with a growing team, that we actually make sure everybody that's new into the team are on the same page, and then we'll hopefully be rolling out some training to acute clinicians. But we're working directly with them as well. But if you've got any worries or questions, always encourage you to phone and link in with us, and we can talk. I mean, sometimes we do some supervision, for example, so more than happy to do that. But yes, we'll be in touch with training a bit later in the year.
We've got another one from John. Could an agreement be reached regarding referrals? CRS teams get referrals. The purpose of referral to ED service at times when assessed by ED, they do not meet the criteria for the service, and their needs can be met by other services, for example, primary care. It's very difficult to discharge from secondary mental health services once referred in. Is it possible that ED assess for their service first, and then if accepted, can allocate consultant and care coordinator?
Okay, that's a really long question, but I think what I'm going to say hopefully will answer it. So when we've merged with Dudley and Walsall services, the way in which adults accessed services in Dudley and Walsall was the referrals had to come through the mental health teams, have an allocated consultant and care coordinator, and then those who were the very poorest, highest risk people with eating disorders were seen by the 2 adult nurses, because there were just 2 nurses covering the whole of Dudley and Walsall adults for eating disorders. So we're in the process now of, because as part of year 3, we've started recruiting to our posts to extend that element of the service. And what will happen is you'll find over this next year, specifically probably towards the end of the year, we'll be able to change that, and we'll align the referral pathway with that which we have with Sandwell and Wolverhampton, which is about taking direct referrals. So at this moment in time, we're not changing that. It's a way of working that was in place before, it certainly had anything to do with myself or the trust, and it's kind of a legacy thing that we've inherited, but we're certainly working in the right way to move things forward. But at this moment in time, we do need to keep things as they are, just in terms of just the increased demand that we already have on the 2 nurses that are currently in post. But we have recently recruited a few more nurses, so we're waiting for those to start, and we are growing. But obviously, to change the way and open up our referral system, we have to have the staffing in place to do that, to keep things safe. Whereas at least now we know that in going through to the mental health team and being seen there, and accessing a consultant, that they're able to be seen. And that's kind of how we're working at the moment. So it's not how we want it to be, it's what we've inherited as part of a legacy, and it's something that we're working really hard to put right. And like I say, by the end of the year, that will absolutely be changing.
We've got another question from Debbie. Why do you think EDs focus on being underweight?
Probably because when we talk about the risks, when we look at things like the MED guidance that looks like medical emergencies and eating disorders, it does strongly focus on people who are very underweight or at risk of sudden death, really. And so I think that's where the focus comes on. I also think that it's focused on that because it's something that feels quite shocking for a lot of people when they see somebody who's very underweight and very emaciated. But I also think that society focuses a lot on the drive for thinness and pushing that kind of message across. So I think that's probably why it highlights sort of underweight presentations of eating disorders. Anybody else got anything to add?
I think for me as well, I think with GPs, it probably relates part, I'm not just highlighting GPs, perhaps professionals, the old diagnostic criteria used to be very much that you had to be underweight, women not having periods, and they were the access, the treatment criteria really, whereas now thankfully that's moved on, and we are able to see people of all levels of weight. So I think there's been a shift there that perhaps isn't always reflected in what people are encountering in primary care, but there's a lot of work being done there. But and also I think think back to, and if I do any training, the original sort of starvation studies done by Ansel Keys in the 50s after the Second World War, they were actually, I was saying to Donna, they were all men, and how have we got to, it all being, men are actually, although a quarter of the population of each disorder is a male, they're not being looked at. But so I think it's a bit of a culture shift as well, a few different things.
I'm also thinking about 2 things that, people come with often the wrong kind of expectations from our service. So often if people are overweight, they think they're going to come to our service and part of their treatment is about us giving them some magic diet that's going to help them lose weight. We're not a weight loss service. Equally, our patients who are very underweight come to our service and they really worry that we're going to make them fat. We're not a making fat service either. We are looking at people having normal eating as best as they possibly can, but mainly managing risks. And so often quite acute risks presenting people who are very malnourished and very underweight, whereas people who are perhaps more overweight have more chronic risks. And so that's why we want to respond quite speedily and promptly to our underweight patients.
I've also seen, Donna, because I talk to obviously to people, and the people that are overweight and suffering the same as what I've suffered with, is one of the questions I get all the time is, I feel guilty coming to this service because there's people who, because people know about anorexia and bulimia, whatever, and they always say to me, I feel really guilty taking up this space. And I think that also comes into it, that people don't recognise it in themselves.
And it's interesting because I think whatever weight people present at, Dean, I know that people will sit in the room and think there's always somebody more deserving than me. It's really
can't most poorly anorexic patients who are incredibly underweight or losing weight very, very quickly say, I shouldn't be here, and there's that sense of denial. But we definitely see that at any level.
And I think you're right, that's the distortion, isn't it? And I think that's what makes it worrying, dangerous as well, is often people with anorexia and very underweight don't appreciate or don't have insight or the ability to recognise how unwell or how at risk they actually might be. Whereas most people who are overweight would be able to say to you, yes, I'm overweight and I know there's more chronic risks from my health, such as diabetes, etc. So there's different elements in that way too, isn't there?
We've got another question from Tammy. In your opinion, is disorder considered as a diagnosable mental illness, or is an ED a behaviour of an existing mental health condition or poor mental health?
Okay. I think what I want to say about that is it absolutely is a mental health condition. You know, it's in the ICD-11, it's been in DSM for a long, long time. So it absolutely is a mental health condition. There's no doubt about that. And I think, you know, if it, you asked, is it behavioural? Well, often what we see is behavioural presentations as a consequence of the underlying difficulty. And often the underlying difficulty with an eating disorder might be things like distorted body image, issues around control, low self-esteem, that people might have experienced quite significant trauma in their lives. And that's leading me on nicely to the idea that actually when people present with an eating disorder, very seldom does anyone present with an eating disorder in isolation. They might have a whole heap of other mental health and physical health difficulties alongside that. So again, that's one of the things that we do in our specialist service and why we have an MDT, so that we can look at an all-round approach to how people are presenting as an individual with their own experience to what led them to the development and the maintenance of living with an eating disorder.
We've got another question. What do you think about organisations like Weight Watchers and Slimming Well?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I can really comment on that. I'm probably not fair placed. I mean, from my own point of view, what I would say is it might help for some people who are overweight, haven't got an eating disorder and want to find more normalised ways of eating. However, I'm not sure whether they're quite promoting normal ways of eating or whether they're promoting abnormal ways of eating, which is something I can never kind of promote. And equally, I would say my experience of working in eating disorders, you know, and I've been a mental health nurse for well over 20 years, is I've often seen people who might have gone down those avenues where it's worked out in a very damaging, unhelpful way for them. That's not to say it's been unhelpful for everybody. I'll ask Serena with trepidation.
I mean, obviously, I've been a dietitian for nearly 12 years, so and one of my first roles was in weight management. So, you know, I think just being really clear, like Donna said, it's generally not helpful for people that are suffering with an eating disorder. For weight management, the people that want support and they benefit from a group setting, then there are elements of help. But we do unfortunately see things like in my practice in eating disorders in the past 5 years, I've seen young people presenting who have perhaps been in, I won't name, but been in sort of weight management groups as young as 16. And it, you know, we know that dietary restriction is just not helpful to, you know, growing adolescents. They have very high nutritional requirements, and it can lead to very black and white thinking about dieting. So there are some concerns generally, and perhaps more research needs to be done around other programs as well. You've got the National Weight Control Registry, you've got the National Weight Measurement Programme in children. You do see some, and it often is about the way things are communicated for me as well. So young people that perhaps had their results communicated in year 6 might then embark on sort of quite significant dietary restriction that at that age is within the family. So we need to be careful of very, very extreme dieting, really. I mean, both of those things are regulated that you've mentioned, but you know, people do also take them very individually as well. So it's just what we see obviously is a lot of dieting that's gone wrong or too far or is too restrictive.
But I think it's also about the over-evaluation of weight size and shape, isn't it, in the population, which young people and adults come in contact with in education, in the workplace, in home, amongst their peer groups, in absolutely everywhere. They've been bombarded with all these messages, and actually I know that we spend a lot of time when people are in treatment and about talking to them about how to live their life differently by not being overwhelmed and engaged in those kind of really unhelpful discussions that just seek to make somebody feel terrible about themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. So if you think about the traditional weight management group where you weigh every week, you know, that's not something we will be supporting in eating disorders. It can be quite distressing. It has to be the right kind of supportive environment. So we don't know, it's not suitable for people with eating disorders. Be really clear on that. And being really careful about the conversations at home, particularly with young people, really young people as well. Because and now obviously we've got social media as well, which I know has come up already today, but you know, we've now got that element to it, and things on social media move so quickly. If people are looking at something that's very restricted, they then show 10 times more that amount of information, and it grows and it grows and it grows. So the Freed Network's very good for looking at social media and younger people and teenagers. There's some really good information there, and it's about, you know, whether they can actually look at something more supportive instead of, you know, all this dietary information that's out there that's very, very confusing and conflicting. But hopefully there'll be more positive things being done all the time. But it is a real challenge in addition to those things that you've mentioned, things that moved on from when they were started. Yeah.
I'm just going to group the last two questions from the chat, which is from Jean and Ash, and I know there's a hand up as well.
Okay.
We offer support to young people with a diagnosis of learning disabilities and or autism, and those aged 0 to 19 who have type 1 diabetes and have diabulimia.
Okay, so I think there's a couple of questions in there, and one is what we find, we mentioned comorbidity earlier, that seldom do we find an eating disorder presenting on its own, and we've absolutely noticed the increase in people presenting with comorbidity with autism or ADHD, so absolutely we don't exclude people from our service because they have that diagnosis. In fact, we worked very closely alongside other services that work with young people with ASC. So hopefully that answered what I think that question was asking. And then the second one was about working with diabetes, people with diabetes. Did you say young people with diabetes?
Type 1 diabetes, I think, and diabetes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We do work with people who have diabulimia, and we work closely with diabetes teams that patients are involved with as well. So there's kind of collaborative working there. Yeah, and obviously I suppose because what we tend to see more than anything with that kind of presentation is people misusing their insulin to create weight loss, really, which is very, very dangerous, and hence needs a really linked up approach with the teams that they work with.
Thanks. I'm just going to bring in Alex, who's been really patiently having her hand.
Yeah, first of all, I was just going to say, well done, Dean, and I'm glad I joined. So I'm my background. I'm with you, consultant and trainer, so peer support specialist. Specifically, my lived experience is eating disorders, so that's why Dean and I connected. I'm just wondering about your vision for peer support in your eating disorder service. Is there sort of part of the transformation to increase your workforce, or across the next year, or?
What do you mean, our peer support workforce?
Yeah, your peer. Yeah, specifically that. I mean, again, recommendations from peer support is not to have a lone peer support worker in a team. I'm sure you know that, and I know it's all about funding. But I'm just wondering whether that is a thing for the future.
Yeah, I don't know if Dean told you that he's doing the job as part of his job share, so there'll be actually 2 in the service anyway.
Okay.
And just like that person to start. Obviously, recruitment, it can never get off with. And Dean was very prompt and quick and wanted to get started right away, so we're just waiting for the other person to start. So there is 2, and I think again, with most things that you start in a service, you have to think, well, what's going to be the demand? How can we create this role? How can we support it? And how can we develop it, really? And I'm sure I've said to Dean more than once, that any ideas that he has, please feel free to open his mouth, because he can see he's doing the role. You can see it as he grows. And yeah, we do have an ambition for it to be really good. And one of the things that we particularly want to do, and obviously bear in mind Dean is very, very new to role, so asking to do it this week, for example, would be perhaps unrealistic, is we want to kind of develop something that is very similar to what we have in CAMS services, which is called a CAMS council. And basically it's a group where service users are present in that group, and everything that happens in terms of how we develop things is run by those service users. So in CAMS, one of the things they do is, one of the things that comes to my mind is they had a new logo, so they got their peer support group, the CAMS council group, to kind of develop it. So that's one of the things that we're looking at, that Dean will hopefully set up for us, is kind of an eating disorders council. But I'm sure we will find a much better name than that for it. I'm going to think what it is. Eating disorders council, I'm not sure that's quite right for us. But again, we'll ask our service users about that. But that's one of the things that we want Dean to really help lead the way within our services. Co-production, which, as you know, in the NHS is kind of growing, is a really important way for us to invest in, develop our services and make them work for the people that utilise them, really.
Obviously, and just to say as well, I might pass on some information that anybody in your service can go to, because there's a specific eating disorder peer support webinar I'm doing on Wednesday, which is about how to develop your eating disorder peer support, and it might be something that Dean could get involved in terms of if he's part of your growing that service. So I'll try and pass that information along.
Yeah, Alex, if you could email it to me. If you haven't got my email address, so Dean is fine if you've got his. or through comms. That'd be really helpful. I mean, it's late in the day, but I'd like to see whether my lead OT or myself can make that on Wednesday.
Yeah, it's a 2.5 hour thing. It's all recorded. It's not just me. It's Beat. It's Rock. It's and so I can definitely, even if somebody can't go, pass it on for you to watch. So yeah, I'll get that over, because again, as Dean and I discussed, it's so new. Eating disorder peer support. I mean, peer support's new enough, but it is. I mean, I've done lots of research in it, and it's growing, and there's more and more research out there about how it can be successful.
Yeah, Alex, are you at Midlands Partnership?
No, well, at the moment I'm with you consultants, but I'm their eating disorder specialist, and I have worked in eating disorder peer support, and I've researched it. I've got a master's and a PhD in.
No, so I only ask because I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure I've come across, I spoke to somebody at Midlands Partnership about peer support work in eating disorders, and I wasn't sure if it was you see, that's why I asked.
No, I was going to say there's lots of specialists on this webinar. I think Dorset are doing it sort of slightly more ahead than other NHS trusts, so they're coming to speak as well. So I'm interested in hearing about their experience as well. But yeah, I'll get information across to you, because it's, as you say, it's great that you dipped your toe in the water in it, and hopefully I'll give you some ideas.
Oh, fabulous. No, thank you. That would be, and if I can't make it Wednesday, it's really good that you're recording it, because I'm sure I can pick up a link somewhere and watch it later. Thank you.
Donna, we've just had another question pop in from John. I suspect my 11-year-old might have ARFID. Is Beat the best place for help alongside the GP and paediatrician?
I think Beat's a really good place to start, because it gives you sort of quite general information, but definitely really good to hear that you've gone to the GP, that first point of contact, and then you say paediatrician was involved as well. Again, that's really positive, and then either of them can refer into our service as well for a screening and assessment of that. But Beat's a very good place to go. There are other ARFID charities out there, and some parent support groups as well to have a look at, as well as Beat. I'll send out a couple of links on the back of this training as well.
Okay.
Lovely, that's great, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining. We've just got one last slide that I think Donna mentioned earlier that we'd just like to share with you. So I'm just going to hand back over to Donna to just briefly say a little bit more about this before we finish.
Yeah, so this is the Eating Disorders Genetics Initiative, and it's open to anyone aged 16 plus who lives in England and who has an eating disorder or has had one in the past. And we're trying to recruit, as you can see, it says on there, sort of 10,000 people. That's a lot of people, but we're hoping to really recruit well. And this is about looking at genetics and eating disorders. I'm not a geneticist. This study is led by a whole heap of organisations and different trusts that are involved. You can see there that there's a website, and there's a Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I forget, I didn't know what the symbol was for that. That you can actually find more information on, because, and again, we like to share these kind of research initiatives that the trusts get involved with, because we're something that we're always trying to grow our evidence base in eating disorders. We're always trying to learn more and make our treatments work better, and to be able to reach out and reach more people and just grow. And that's why we're a really passionate bunch that work in eating disorders, because we are quite dynamic, we are forward thinking, and joining in for a study like this is often for people who've had an eating disorder or have one, find it really helpful to kind of give back, and helping grow the research and evidence base in eating disorders can only improve things as we go forward. So please take a look at the website or any of the social media pages that you can see here if you would like to get more information or want to join up. That would be fabulous.
That's lovely, thank you. And I'd just like to say a massive thank you to you all. Donna, I know you said before how passionate you are about this subject, and you could talk about it all day. So thank you for succinctly putting that into an 1.5 hour webinar. I'd just like to finish on one comment from Tammy. Dean, thank you so much for being so open and honest about your experiences. And Tammy said, if you can help just one more male to speak up when things get tough, what an inspirational thing to be part of. Thank you for speaking out so confidently and articulating your experiences, Dean. So I just think that's a really nice note to end on. So thank you so much all, and thank you everybody for joining. We will share the recording with you, and we will also send out a post-event survey as well, so please do fill that out. Thank you.
Thank you everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.